I like the fact that Alex chose the word accelerate to the adoption of crypto. The word accelerate means that the adoption is inevitable. The only thing we can do is to just make it go faster. If we all have the right ethos, so if we all try to achieve something that is bigger than the sum of the part, and we all contribute to that something, which is how zkSync wants to play in the space, then we will eventually both benefit as a group.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Edge podcast. I'm DeFi Dad from Fourth Revolution Capital, and I'm joined here by my co-host from 4RC, Nomadic. So Nomadic, how's it going?
It's going good, man. Super excited to talk to Marco today and learn more about zkSync and the zkEVM space. I feel like we're kind of at a similar point maybe that we were at a little over a year ago with some of the optimistic rollups and when they were launching, and we've kind of got to see that play out. And we're just kind of at this precipice of what is going to happen with this zkEVM space. It's super exciting. So yeah, looking forward to learning more.
Gtrade by Gains Network is a decentralized leverage trading platform allowing users to synthetically trade crypto, forex, stocks, and commodities with up to 1000x leverage. Gtrade is live on both Polygon and Arbitrum, with over 30 billion in all-time trading volume and nearly 50 million in vault liquidity. The platform has consistently been among the top earning protocols, with 7-figure monthly revenue and a net deflationary token. Gtrade has become an on-chain staple for both traders and yield seekers. Check them out at gains.trade or by searching Gains Network on Twitter. Yeah, well, before we get started, just a brief intro on Marco. He was once a quant in the banking industry, but now for just over 2 years, he's been the head of business development at Matter Labs, which is the engineering and research team behind the leading Layer 2 scaling solution zkSync Era, or zkSync 2.0 is what we once called it. Matter Labs was an early pioneer to use zero-knowledge proofs to build an EVM-compatible zkRollup, which we're going to talk all about today. Once fully launched, zkSync 2.0, or what will soon be called zkSync Era, may allow for significantly cheaper transactions and faster transactions. With zkSync, all transactions are ultimately verified on Ethereum L2, meaning that users inherit the same security as Ethereum. So again, we'll talk about how this all relates to their flagship zkEVM and what you need to know as a user about their upcoming launch. So Marco, welcome to the Edge. How are you doing?
Very good, and super stoked to be here.
We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this. This is somewhat of a more complex topic. Zero-knowledge proofs, layer 2s is not what the average user, I think, understands about the different DeFi applications that they're using. But our goal here is to help guide them through that, like what exactly they need to know in order to be more well-informed and confident about the security of the layer 2s or applications that they're actually using. So why don't we just start from the beginning? There is a history lesson here to zkSync. I know personally, I got to start using and benefiting from zkSync because I was using it for payments with Gitcoin Grants. Once upon a time, Gitcoin Grants was painful. You would have to do, let's say if you did 50 donations of one DAI, you would have to do 50 separate transactions on Ethereum L2, and you would spend just unbelievable amounts of gas. And then there was this breakthrough with the implementation of zkSync for payments. So anyways, if you could share just an overview of the history of zkSync.
Yeah, very, very glad to. So zkSync started, the journey started more than 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago, with a kind of conceptual idea. So our founders, the two Alex, essentially met and realized that the big problem that at the time we were focusing on, which was product market fit, if solved positively, would have led to a huge problem with scalability, because the block space is small, and this in turn would have led to a huge amount of fees to be paid by users. And in turn, this would have made the problem come back. And also, once you have product market fit and people start to use the system, if fees spike, then all of a sudden people stop using the system. And you kind of get to that situation that doesn't work very well. they figured that zero knowledge proof could potentially solve this issue, and so embarked upon this journey on trying to make it happen. The very first thing they did was to create what is now called the zkSync Lite and was known as zkSync V1 before. And the idea there was to create a proof of concept. So let's take the concept and see if it actually works and show to everyone what's the magic that can come with a zkRollup. And zkSync V1 is very simple. It does payments, atomic swap, and NFT minting, as well as beta transaction, which is you can pay fees in any token, as well as deposit and withdrawal. And with these 6 functions was already quite powerful. And at the time, we spoke with Gitcoin, with whom we share very much the ethos. So they are doing a fantastic job trying to produce public goods, which is a very difficult thing. And as you said, donating to Gitcoin was a pain. First of all, it could be very annoying just to make 50 transactions, and then potentially was very expensive when gas fees started to really increase. So what we enabled was just a checkout system where you could select your 50 donation, put them into a checkout like you do normally on Amazon, then selecting which token you want to pay the fees, and then you pay fees once. And usually these fees were in the order of 10% of a single transaction. So rather than 50 transactions, you were paying 10% of one transaction, you were doing one transaction only, and you could pay in any tokens that you wanted. And this resulted in a significantly better experience for the average user that then also resulted hopefully in a much bigger amount of donation on Gitcoin.
Yeah, I wish I had the numbers off the top of my head about how much more they received in donations, but this was a part of what allowed me to commit myself to working full time in crypto, like getting that Gitcoin grant and seeing the surge of donations, which, was again a direct result of the fact that everyone suddenly could do 50 to 100 $1, transactions for pennies per transaction.
And maybe I don't have those numbers, but I know that over the past 7-8 rounds before they upgraded the system, and now we're working with them to reintegrate zkSync, I think zkSync was accounting for something like almost 90% of all the Gitcoin dollar donated were donated via the zkSync network. So I don't know how much it improved, but I know that it accounted for a huge amount.
Marco, I think before we dive into kind of the zkSync suite of products, I would just love for you to tell us, in your words, what is a zkEVM and why does it matter?
Yeah, so and I think zkEVM is the connection of two topics, two narratives. One is zkRollup and the other is EVM. And maybe I'll start with the second. Why EVM is important? It's because it's today the lingua franca of the blockchain world. For every non-EVM developer, there is tens or hundreds of EVM developers. The second reason is that EVM achieved today a reasonable Lindy properties. As much as you can get in crypto. And this is very important. So EVM, while Solidity, while not being probably the best programming language you can use, is the one that is the most secure. And this seems strange to say, but it is true because it has been poked and probed for the past 7-8 years. And this led to security best practices, led to a security audit industry that is well trained and know what they need to do. So EVM is very important to preserve in terms of security that brings to the system, in terms of availability of development knowledge. And then the third point is that a huge industry has been built around Ethereum today. And this industry includes RPC, node operator, data analytics infrastructure, wallets, on-ramps, off-ramps, centralized exchange connectivities, and all of these things will need to migrate. Every time you change programming language or you change virtual machine, you need to completely migrate the entire ecosystem, which is a huge endeavor and is a bootstrapping problem. So as an analogy, you want to go to Dubai now that has been fully built up. You don't want to go there and start to dig wells. That's not an ideal scenario. Even if we can all agree that in 20 years you will have Dubai, it's still not a very pleasant exercise to go there and build the very first wells. With EVM, you inherit everything that Ethereum has been built until today. And then we can talk about zkRollup. So zkRollup is essentially the leading scaling solution. It's pretty widely accepted that this is the way in which blockchain will scale. Vitalik wrote it clearly in one of his very latest blog, where he says that zkRollup will win all use cases in the medium to long term. The thing is, the medium to long term is coming very fast, or it came already a few weeks ago when we launched. So a zkRollup is essentially an infrastructure where you have a layer 1 smart contract that does three things. It's the custodian of the assets within the rollup. It maintains on-chain the state of the virtual machine. It's actually like a database, and then there's a mechanism to update the state. Because of the last two properties, it's the custodian of all the assets and maintain the state on chain. Anybody can send the special transaction to the zkRollup smart contract via only layer 1 and confirm that they own assets in the last valid state and withdraw permissionlessly without interacting with the layer 2 at all. So the layer 2 at that point can be malicious, can have a bug. It doesn't really matter if the layer 2, if the zkRollup has a bug, then simply the state cannot be updated. But you can still recover all your funds by only talking to layer 1. And this is what gives the system the same exact security of the layer 1 on which it is attached to. The way in which rollup differ from each other are in the mechanism to update the valid state. We have optimistic rollup using game theory mostly. And so the idea there is the validator sends a new batch to the layer 1 smart contract, and then sometimes is allowed to pass for people to contest this batch to provide a fraud proof. Now, in theory, this creates a game theory equilibrium because anybody can provide a fraud proof. Someone will always do it. And so there's no point for the validator to cheat and produce an invalid block. But as Einstein said, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they are different. And so with game theory, which was one of my favorite subjects in university, so it's something I really like, you have a lot of assumption. You have assumption about the rationality of the player, full information. You have assumption about profit maximization. And many of these things are just false in an adversarial environment. Take a government who is very well resourced, who wants to attack a rollup. They may not care to lose money. Now the system already starts to perform relatively poorly. The second big issue with the optimistic approach is that the UX is not great. You have to wait 1 week. You can solve it by paying, though, so it's also not great with a fungible token. You cannot solve it for non-fungible token. You cannot solve it for general message passing. And nobody likes to wait. And the third, I think, big issue is that optimistic rollup are kind of more of the same in terms of scaling type. So if you think of layer 1 as being an island, once you finish the space, then property prices start to spike. You think of optimistic rollup as building skyscrapers. You build skyscraper, you get to 40 floors. Now you have 40 times more space, which is great, but it's not fantastic. At some point, if that island is very desirable, like say New York or Singapore, then people will come, and at some point property price will spike again. And then you don't have many things you can do. You have to start to demolish building and build them taller, but building above a certain height becomes exponentially more expensive itself. And so it stops scaling. It's really like a property of the system don't lend to scaling above a certain point. zkRollup instead scale like computer system, so scale like Google. If Google has 1 million more user, buy 1,000 more server. If Google has 100 million more user, buy 100,000 more server, plus maybe a little bit for overhead, but a tiny amount. And zkRollup scale in exactly the same way. And they use hyperchain, hyperscalability, and they use recursive zero-knowledge proof to do that. And it really enables now the world of value to come on chain. So what are zkRollup? How are they different? zkRollup different in the method of updating the state, and it works in a different way. So there is an independent entity that moves the transaction off chain, verifies that they are all valid, and compute a proof, a zero-knowledge proof. Or we don't really use the zero-knowledge aspect too much. We use the succinct property of snark, the S, to create a proof that is very small, the proof that all the transactions have computational integrity, i.e. that they're all valid, they're all correct computation. And then we send this proof together with the final state back onto the layer 1. And this is more powerful. No, as Karl Popper wrote a book about proving that something is false is so much easier than proving that something is true. But also proving that something is true is much more powerful. And this is indeed the case with rollup as well. And also with a zkRollup, the moment that the proof touches the layer 1, is immediately final and valid from the point of view of layer 2. Then, of course, you need to settle on the layer 1, but say after it achieves 10 to 20 confirmation, then you can consider the system final. You can immediately withdraw your money. You can do all the things that you want, and it's very, very fast. The second property I mentioned before is it's limitless scaling with hyperchains. Maybe we can talk about it a bit later. And the third, it allows us to settle on chain only the state difference. So this is something that is not widely understood. In an optimistic rollup, you send on chain all the transactions. And because essentially you need to allow for people to be able to replay any of these to prove that they are false. With zkRollup, you send the proof and then you send the final state. So for some application, this doesn't really matter, but for some application, this creates massive lower fees. Take an Oracle, for example. If you take an Oracle price that moves from 100 to 101 to 99 to 70 and moves 1,000 times within a block time of, say, 20 minutes, then on optimistic rollup, you will send 1,000 transactional chain with 1,000 call data cost. On zkRollup, on not all zkRollup actually. I think the others are not necessarily using the same infrastructure, but for zkSync, where we settle only the state difference, this results in very, very, very cheap Oracle updates. It will result in very, very cheap AMM trades, and few other classes of application will benefit from a massive further boost to scalability than any normal rollup would.
For the average DeFi user, the average crypto user that hopefully is going to be onboarded to using DeFi and different crypto applications because of zkSync era, what will this upcoming zkEVM allow them to do that they couldn't do on an Ethereum L1 or, let's say, other L2s? What sort of opportunities does this open up?
So great question. So first of all, it will allow them to do everything they can do today on layer one because of the EVM compatibility. So all the tools, all the application that you come to love and enjoy, they will be able to migrate with very, very small to no effort on zkSync era, which is great. zkSync era also implemented immediately all the EIPs that are related to account abstraction. So there has been this long-term debate on Ethereum pioneered by Vitalik that has not been come to conclusion. So there's a lot of upgrades that potentially will come to Ethereum that has not been implemented, that we instead implemented straight away on the base layer. With account abstraction, you can essentially do a bunch of things that are very interesting, but I think from a DeFi perspective, really three that matters. One, you can change the token in which you pay fees. So as a project, imagine an AMM in which rather than paying fees in Ether, when you trade USDC for the token that you like, you can pay these fees in either USDC or the token that you like, or any other token for that matter. So user experience becomes much easier. The second, it will allow us to change who pays the fees. So again, imagine Uniswap paying the fees for its user and embedding them in the fee that the protocol receives, which at the moment is zero, but at some point could be positive. And third is the biggest hindrance of them all. Now, so today, all of us that are in crypto have dealt with private keys. Have figured it out. Some of us may even enjoy it. But in general, we all know, speaking with friends that are normies, that they don't. It's clearly something that nobody likes. Not 99.9% of human beings don't like private keys. With account abstraction, you enable social key recovery, which means that you can now have your smartphone creating a private key in your phone and signing transaction on your behalf. Now, this UX-wise is great. It will enable your grandmother to get on DeFi and trade on Uniswap. She will have no problem. As long as she owns a smartphone, she will have no problem to do it. The problem with that is security. In the old world, if your grandma loses her phone, then she loses access to all her assets, which is terrible. With social key recovery, your mom will be able to have nominated 4 or 5 people, one in the Argent to design their guardian. And if they lose their phone, they can recreate the private key. So imagine how the world of DeFi will change. It essentially will be able to give the DeFi application, the dApps, a user experience that is very similar to that of Web2. You press a button, you have a sub-second confirmation, something happens in the background, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what, which is, I think, great to onboard the next 1 billion or 2 billion people. At the same time, zkRollup, and they are the only technology that allow this, preserve in full the security of Ethereum. And I say this because optimistic rollup preserved it almost in full, but not completely, because to all the assumption of math, you have to add the assumption of game theory, which kind of by definition says that it's a little bit less secure. With zkRollup, you only trust math. And as long as the math is correct, then you are exactly as safe as Ethereum is. Oh, and then in terms of application, what can be enabled? Imagine, there's a lot of things that couldn't be done before because of lack of scaling or because of poor UX. So in DeFi, you have order books, the centralized exchanges that will come and complement the AMM. We are super excited to see what happens there. You have a lot of, you have all the other derivatives. So there were a project on layer one. I played with many of them. They were doing options. The problem with option is that the probable prices grows exponentially. You have multiple maturity, you have multiple strikes. So rather than one thing to update, you now may have a 50 for each underlying that you have. So option will become, possible with layer twos. Perps, as the YDX showed, are significantly kind of fundamentally, and perp as well, optimism, they're fundamentally better than NGMX on Arbitrum. I mean, there's many good examples of where perps, how perps are improved by moving onto a layer two. You will have a lot of new type of DeFi application. And then is the interaction with gaming that I think is also very interesting. We gamify to see what exactly happens there in the interaction within the two. Again, enabled by factors of magnitude, the lower fees, what you can start to do in this space.
Yeah, a lot of the benefits that you just called out are, I want to say, roadblocks to Web3 based games really growing in the near future. Like they need some of the simpler benefits of being able to pay in any sort of token. I would imagine too, like as fiat on-ramps become that much more reliable, that much more common with a layer two like the upcoming zkSync era, this is just going to really like open the floodgates to building more games that allow you to take advantage of some of these like Web3 DeFi benefits.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like imagine, the analogies, like the lock in your browser. So the lock in your browser is something that tells you that you're now using HTTPS. There is an exchange of private keys also there. It's actually a pretty complicated protocol. Most of us don't really know what's going on. You just know that it's slightly more secure than if there isn't the lock. Imagine an Ethereum icon there in the browser that says that now you're playing a game and it's now powered by blockchain, which means that, for example, the in-game assets are yours to keep and to use and to sell and to do whatever you want with. And that's it. That's all you need to know. And you don't really need to go and change the nonce of your transaction because it got stuck and wait 10 minutes, maybe increase the gas because what's going on, there's a spike in fees. All of that disappears. You have much more deterministic fees, and maybe the protocol pays them on your behalf, so you don't really care, you don't even know that they exist. You have sub-second confirmation, so you click, boom, confirm, done, next. You don't need to wait and see what happens for 20, 30 minutes. And so the experience is going to be so much better. And as you say, we're super excited to see what comes. In gaming is one of the group of people that we are talking the most, and they're the most excited about the zkRollup, especially in hyperchain mode, because for them, very, very low fees, infinitesimal fees will be essential as well.
Yeah, that's all super exciting, and that was a great response to that, Marco. It definitely feels like we're finally taking away all the impediments to, I guess, adoption. Solving for throughput, account abstraction, just making it easier for your grandma, my grandma to interact with blockchains. I guess we're almost getting to that point where it's like, okay, the table's set. We actually need dApps with good product market fit, and let's see what happens now. But I guess kind of getting back to zkSync, I would love for you just kind of to walk through the whole suite of products. I know that's probably a big question, but tackle that in any way you want. Just what are all the different kind of elements you're building that make up zkSync?
Yeah, so and I would say from a very abstract sense, zkSync is really providing just a security at scale. So what we want is a tool that allows to preserve the security that Ethereum is creating and focusing on. And the way that they solve the blockchain trilemma is to focus on security and decentralization. We allow that to continue to happen, and we solve the scaling bit. So that's pretty much the product that the zkSync is providing. And it can be declined in various ways. The first and foremost is the zkSync era, what it was called zkSync v2, which is a base layer. It's a fully functional, general purpose zkRollup that is EVM-compatible. So you can take any application that you have on layer one and deploy it. You can take any developer that is skilled with Solidity and have him or her deploy on zkSync with the same ease that they used to have in layer one. You can take all of the tooling and tool chain and infrastructure that was powering your dApp on layer one and just rely on them on layer two. So that's pretty cool. The second thing is we realize is that the rollups in general are bounded by the cold data cost and the cold data space that is available on layer one. So we started to work a couple of years ago on something called zkPorter. zkPorter technically is a volition. Before talking about volition, I may have to talk about Validium. So Validium is a system in which, before I mentioned, there is the proof of validity and what it is proven. So a zkRollup in abstract is just these two things, the proof and then the list of things that it is proving. The thing is that the proof is tiny. When it goes on layer 1, occupies a very small space, is very cheap. It's very cheap to verify, but it's also very cheap to store. The call data instead is gigantic. It can be 99% of the cost. So a lot of research has started to be done in terms of like, where can we put this stuff that is much cheaper? And there's various solutions. You have the Starkware approach, which is a centralized data availability committee. You have research from Celestia, from Eigenlayer. You can actually store it yourself, depending on the application. If you're a game, for example, you cannot publish the data availability anywhere. Our approach is to create, again, a decentralized fashion. We try to be as decentralized as possible and as ethos aligned to Ethereum as possible. And so our data availability is a decentralized committee of guardians that safekeep the data and provide the data availability guarantees. So this is how we would approach the problem of Validium. Evolution is a system like zkPorter in which you can have two types of accounts, two types of users that exist in the same space and are atomically composable, that though can choose their own data availability policy. So imagine a world in which Travis Whale is, of course, using zkRollup state, and I'm a shrimp, so I'm focusing much more on cheapness, and so I'm using my zkPorter account type. We can both provide liquidity to the same Uniswap pool. We can both trade synchronously. I don't even necessarily need to know that you have a zkRollup data availability and I have a zk and I have a Validium data availability, because we are synchronously composable within the same state. We are very excited about this because it defragments liquidity. Today, you have to choose, right? You have to be on Ethereum layer 1, or you have to be on one of the side chain to do the second, if you focus on cheapness. And so you fragment liquidity, which is not cool. With zkPorter, you can defragment it. Now, we are deciding where to prioritize zkPorter, because in the meantime, of course, for 844K, there's tank sharding, which may make data availability cost lower by, we don't exactly know, could be, a few X's to even 100X, I heard. And so depending on how much cheaper data availability becomes, zkPorter may become slightly less urgent. But still, urgent is, because if we want a limitless scale, it cannot be done without Validium and volition. And the third big kind of family of things that we are working on is Hyperchains. So Hyperchains is the ability to, as I was describing before, deploy a zkRollup on top of itself and create fractal scaling. So Hyperchains will be extremely important for what we call hyperscaling in conjunction with zkPorter and volition infrastructures, and will allow the world of value to come on chain. And the fourth is what we call Hyperbridge. So Hyperbridge is a communication network, is a general communication channel that is validity proven, that is cryptographically secure, that allow you to have that very high degree of very cheap, very fast composability across all this internet of layers that is built on top of zkSync. And then there is, if you want, the decentralization. So today we are centralized, which is a state that we totally dislike. And so one of the product, if you want, that we want to bring is very clear, honest, effective decentralization that comes to the zkSync era network. And we are working on all of these things in parallel. So they will all come over the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, wow. I don't know how you guys project manage everything. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but if it weren't already apparent, Fourth Revolution Capital had the chance to invest in Matter Labs, despite the fact that I know I personally and the team has known Matter Labs and zkSync for years. So anyways, we're very proud to have invested. Just want to disclose that up front. But even we as investors, we really do lose track of just all of the different products that you're working on and everything that is, ultimately shipping here in the next 12 months. One of the points you just made about plans for Hyperchains and Hyperscaling, which I think are like two of the greatest marketing terms coined by the team. those actual products, though, can you help to dumb down, again, what are the benefits we can expect as users from those? Maybe give us some examples of products we might, expect to use once Hyperchains and Hyperscaling is delivered.
So a hyperchain is essentially a dedicated chain that is designed to be given to a user or an ecosystem of users. So we think they're going to be a perfect answer to both the dApp chain narrative as well as the private chain narrative. So in the dApp chain world, take DYDX. The problem that someone like DYDX is facing by forking Cosmos, or is going to face, or is facing actually, they announced that they would have launched in December, but it's taking longer. And I think in part this is due to at least two big problems. One is that you want to have a bridge to Ethereum, because that's where the action is. And if you go away from Ethereum, you end up having a non-native bridge, which, as we saw with Ronin and all I don't even have to say, but basically this is like 60-70% probably of all the money lost in Axe over the past year has been through bridges. And so you are very good at creating your own dApp. You are an expert of, say, decentralized exchanges like DYDX is. Why do you want to embark in also figuring out how to do secure bridges? And the second problem, which is even bigger, is you need to figure out security for your chain. You have to bootstrap the security, which is a terrible thing to do. So security, like decentralization, is like a breathing life in the primordial soup. Yes, it happens. Yes, it can happen again, but it's very difficult. Why do you want to play God? No, it's much easier to inherit it. If you go with your own hyperchain, you just have a native bridge to Ethereum. It comes as a byproduct of what you're building, and you inherit in full the security of Ethereum. So two big problems that are just brushed away and disappear. And the same is true for private chain, the old Hyperledger, Cora conversation. So if you are a big institution today, you have this chain, and I had a conversation with a guy that was in Hyperledger, and he was saying that out of 1,000 projects they did, there's probably a handful. So in less than one hand, you can count those that are happy with what they have done. And the key reason, most of all, is that they say private chains are too expensive and they don't scale. And I would argue that the problem is fundamental. They don't scale because they're not credibly neutral. So if I am Bank A, I don't want to use Bank B's infrastructure just because it's Bank B infrastructure and they can mess with the system. But if they need to produce a validity proof, they cannot mess with the system, because you cannot produce a proof of that something is valid if it's not valid. So if they cannot mess with the system, then I don't mind joining that infrastructure. It's now credibly neutral. And so what can you expect to come? You can expect for some very large dApp to move and create their own hyperchains. And this will create specialization. And so the UX will improve, the cost will reduce, and they will still maintain total composability with the rest of the zkSync and the broadly Ethereum ecosystem. So you can expect, hopefully something like Uniswap to deploy on its own hyperchain. You can expect for some of the very successful other dApp to go into their own layers and start to customize and specialize their own environment. The second thing is you can start to see traditional finance and the traditional world coming in on chain. So imagine being able to trade on an AMM-like infrastructure, something that is in the real world. So a mix between eBay and an AMM, where the engine that powers the trading is actually happening on chain, or you have an auction that is on chain, but then powers a real world transaction. And imagine connecting it with a credit card that then powers a very fast and efficient on-ramping settlement at scale and many other cool things. So you can expect all of that to happen and become very, very powerful.
That's awesome. I have a quick follow-up to that. I don't know if you can answer this right now, Marco, but like that kind of hyperchain thesis that you just walked through, how far away is that, or how close are we to that world?
So I think I can answer in like a couple of ways. The first is that the good news is that essentially an hyperchain alone is just a zkRollup deployed on top of itself. So in few months, once we will all be comfortable, the zkSync has no bugs. Essentially, 99% of the infrastructure for hyperchains is pretty much ready. The bad news is that the last 1% is usually difficult to do. And so eventually, especially Hyperbridges is something we will have to build. And so the big power of Hyperchain is really in the connectivity with each other, not just creating one that sits there and is composable through the layer one, through the layer two, and then through the layer one, but something that is many-to-many that can speak directly to every other Hyperchain. That's something we need to build, and it will probably take at least 6 months. And so it will start to arrive at the end of the year if we are lucky, or probably the following year. In parallel, instead, we want to make Hyperchain very easy to use. So the ideal scenario, our regime, is that there is an SDK that you as a user may want to just take and use. You will have a set of options when you set up your own Hyperchain, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that are pre-built. So Hyperchain are open-ended. You can change the consensus mechanism pretty much arbitrarily, for example, but we may have 1, 2, 3, the one we use, and a couple of other we explore that are readily available for people to pick and choose from, with their own benefits and costs. The second is ideally there needs to be something we bootstrap, which is a new portion of the industry that caters for Hyperchains. So there may be the operator as a service, there may be proof generation as a service, or sequencer as a service, and so on and so forth. So we are working already with some of the players to see if people are interested to develop this kind of infrastructure for the ecosystem. And then we will need to offer prepackaged Hyperchains that come with a portion of the infrastructure in layer one that is already available. So stuff like Dune and stuff like the Graph, and connectivity with the major RPC node operators. So the ideal scenario is that now when you go into the and to use the Hyperchain SDK, you pick and choose what you want. You have pre-agreed agreements with all the major players, and you can essentially spin one up in a matter of a few days to a week. And then, unless you want to, of course, create a portion of the infrastructure that is highly customized, in which case you'll have to build that. But most of the rest should be able to come out of the box, and you should be able to just partner up with other people to do whatever you don't want to do, you're not interested in doing. So that will take a longer time. Will probably come at the end of the year or next year. Stay tuned for Hyperchains, because we will announce exciting partnership with large players who are looking into this space and starting to think about it and exploring in it. So this will start to come very soon.
With over 60,000 subscribers and 450 integrations, Push Protocol, the leader in Web3 communications, just launched Push Group Chat. While Push Chat already enables secure and private wallet-to-wallet messaging between any wallet addresses, the new Push Group Chat allows anyone to permissionlessly create groups, share files, and collaborate with communities natively on Web3. Try it now at app.push.org. With over 170 million TVL cross-chain, the multi-chain liquid staking protocol Stader Labs is just about to launch the ETH liquid staking token ETHX. ETHX will give you the best of decentralized staking and DeFi yields. What's more is that anyone can permissionlessly run an ETHX node with just a 4 ETH bond. To get more alpha on the ETHX launch, go to staderlabs.com/Ethereum. You had me thinking earlier in the conversation about crypto players like Coinbase, who have alluded to a multi-year plan with many phases to it. And they're clearly looking to incorporate more and more DeFi native elements. And this is one where I could envision Coinbase eventually operating completely on chain with this hyperscaling and seeing like a closed order book still at work, but ultimately happening on chain and in this case on zkSync era, because the economic incentives are there. I mean, there's all these benefits to them going on chain, but the problem has always been, is it economical for them to do so? And I think that's what's exciting here, is that eventually it will make more sense to be building, on a zkSync era versus having a centralized exchange operating, with their own private servers.
Totally agree. And the guys at Coinbase are doing a fantastic job. Jesse and the team and the protocol team are really pushing the boundary of what a centralized entity can do and where they want to be. So we are super excited to see what they're doing with the friends at Optimism. It's great. And we'd love to collaborate with them, in any way we can, and I'm sure we will, at some point. But in general, what you said, I think it's very interesting. So on one end, there is the economic aspect. So now it is economical to do it on chain. It's probably more economical than off chain. The second is, before there was also a big problem about feasibility at all. So we've a very small number of transactions per second. With big spikes in gas fees in case there is a big NFT drops. We've all of this, which essentially is an outage from the point of view of a larger financial institution like Coinbase. So with all of these things in place, an entity like a centralized exchange was not really considering seriously to move on chain. But now it becomes feasible. And the third, I think, is also regulatorily wise. It could be a very nice move. So yes, there are regulators like the US regulator that now seems is leaning very much to let's just choke this thing that we don't like, which is crypto. But there are other, like the Swiss regulator is moving in the completely opposite direction. The question that they are asking to anybody that is moving business logic on chain is mostly around, guarantee me that this is going to be credibly neutral, that this is going to be decentralized, not vice versa. No, go and KYC the node operators or something like that. So by moving on chain, it's of course a bold move, but may enable a much better regulatory environment. It will require regulators to change a little bit their framework. So of course, in the current box, especially in the US, where everything is predicated on trusted intermediaries, and so if you use that box, then the decentralized version of the box is really not something that they know how to deal with. But if people are honest, intellectually honest, and they look at the new decentralized version of the box, they will realize that you don't need reporting. You can just check. It's written there. It's easy. The FBI says that they would love everybody to use Bitcoin when they are drug dealers because they can catch them much more easily. So it's actually very efficient if you are a regulator to check the chain and see what's going on. It will be transparent, which is great for the user's perspective. It's going to be probably cheaper and more efficient. It, of course, will squeeze some of the rent-seeking behavior that is in some of the industries, and they will fight for it, and they will fight for the rent-seeking, possibilities that they enjoy today. But we will have to fight too, And I think Coinbase is starting, and it's great to see one of the biggest players to really take a stance here.
Switching gears here a bit, Marco. Will we see a zkSync token? And if so, what utility will it have? And then will ETH still be used for gas on L2 with zkSync?
Yeah, so we don't have a specific plan yet for the token. We are, of course, looking at it with interest. It's, if used correctly, token are a great tool. They enable effective decentralization, and so it's definitely something that we are considering. Should there is a token, what Alex already committed to is that 2/3 of the token will be distributed, so the ERA network will be majority owned by the community, and the insider will only have 1/3 ownership at the beginning, and probably then going down from there, in the future. So that's one thing I can say for sure. The second is the token that is used, the base token for the ERA, the zkSync ERA environment is ETH. It makes a lot of sense because the validators need ETH in order to settle the transaction down to layer 1, and so that was the easiest choice. But because of Paymaster, which is a subset of account abstraction, practically any token can be used to pay fees. So we are already working with some large DEX aggregators to create an add-in that any DeFi app can add, any app in reality can add to their environment, where they will allow you as a user to pick the token you want to use to pay fees. And so you will receive a quote in that token. You say yes. In the background, essentially, there will be one of these aggregators that will swap the token you wanted to use for ETH, and then the validators will receive ETH, so that their balance sheet is simpler to manage. Then, we are taking a lot of inspiration from anybody who's doing great things. So we think the Optimism guys are doing great things with their approach to decentralization. So we will look at that carefully, and we'll probably want to learn as much as we can from their actions and exactly what's happening now with all the things that they are doing with governance. So the token will be a necessary tool for governance. We plan to have a lot of cool stuff on chain, I can give you one kind of sneak peek for this. So as you may know, with zkSync V1, now zkSync Lite, we pioneered the concept of security councils. The idea there was that on one end, you need to be able to upgrade smart contracts. On the other end, you don't want the team to be able to do it unilaterally. Otherwise, you have rug pulls all the time. So what we did is we created a system where originally there was a 21-day lock to upgrade the zkSync infrastructure. So in and of itself is very safe. 21 days, this happens on chain, everybody is triggered once this starts. And so if you don't like the upgrade, you can just withdraw and nobody can stop you. So the probability of a rug pull becomes very small. Of course, if there is a significant serious bug, now you're locking yourself into potentially not being able to patch it. And eventually the user may still lose money. Rather than you rug pull them is someone else. But at the end of the day, the result is still very bad. So what we decided is to be able to accelerate this time lock by involving a council. There's a council with quite a few members, and depending on how many sign a transaction, the time lock becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. Now, this is great, and we plan to re-implement exactly the same thing in this initial intermediate phase for zkSync era. But eventually, the ability to accelerate an upgrade or to really deal with security problems should really belong to the broader ecosystem. So we have to engineer how to do that. And there may be another major use case for the token, should it exist in the future. Ooh, and finally, sorry, I forgot. So if there is a token, the validation process is a proof of stake system. So the token will be required by the validator and staked in order to obtain the right to produce a certain number of blocks that is proportional to the amount of token that the validator has a stake versus the total amount of tokens staked.
All makes sense. Just a moment ago, you mentioned some lessons learned from the governance launch of Optimism. And funny enough, if we think back, that was I believe during the summer, and after the implosion of Terra. So it's kind of remarkable what they pulled off, and a testament to, again, the great work that they did. So yeah, clearly inspiration there to draw from. Any other lessons to highlight? Arbitrum has obviously had a huge year of growth. We've seen a lot of exciting new DeFi protocols launched there. Yeah, I'm just curious if anything else has been top of mind for you as you've had the opportunity to observe other L2s that have already launched.
Yeah, totally. So this is one of the advantages of not being first, is that you can observe what the other people are doing. And there's a lot to learn from, pretty much all the other teams that are in the scaling race, if you want. They're great. And there's a huge amount of things to learn. And I think there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination also for the next 6 to 12 months, right? A lot of stuff still to learn while, we all launch and we all start to figure out exactly how this complex system works. With respect to tokens, I think it's interesting to see exactly what Optimism did. They launched in the bear market, and they were very courageous to do that, I think. And on one end, I think they did a great job on the governance side. On the other, it looked like that token as an incentive to create momentum and to solidify it, in comparison with Arbitrum, didn't work very well. So maybe one lesson there is that, tokens are not that effective, at least in a bear market, right? If we want to use these data points in order to really bootstrap the ecosystem, you need to do something else. By speaking to project, what Arbitrum seems to be doing very well is support. In the old world would be customer success. It's making sure that they have someone that helps project to do the things that they want to do. And I think they're doing it very well. And we definitely would like to learn there and build a very strong success team so that we can help, our partners, the projects to deploy on zkSync to be successful, to be functioning well. We have observed carefully what Starkware has done too. They launched their network with very low cap. That may not be that effective, in terms of, again, growth, and it may be more effective to just stay in testnet on mainnet rather than launch it with a 10 ETH or 20 ETH cap. We may want to have a cap as well, but we may want to have it much, much larger when we launch. So there's a lot of things that we are trying to learn from what the other are doing. But in general, we are monitoring what's happening with grants, for example, very carefully. So the very old playbook, that was often engineered by FTX predominantly doesn't seem to work. No, you launch a chain, you create this carpet bombing grant program that are all very small so that you can afford it, but big enough to attract someone to do at least a logo and maybe some minor deployments in your chain. And then you show numbers go up in terms of like, oh, look how many logos do I have in this presentation. It's great. This doesn't seem to be really conducive to a very good, strong, fundamental growth. So we want to go away from that. So there's a lot of stuff. We don't have, I think, any very firm key learning of something that really works. We have a lot of learning of something that didn't work, which is still pretty good, and hopefully we can eat some of those things that work, and people will say, "Hey, we learned this from the zkSync Cora team."
I'm excited to hear about projects that are actually being created by founders that are building things that will be launching on zkSync. So I would just love to hear any projects that you're really excited about. How many projects are going to be launching on zkSync kind of after this baby alpha is complete? And then I'm super excited about Web3 gaming. Is there anything you would like to touch on in that space as well?
Yeah, so first of all, we are super happy. We feel blessed. I want to officially thank everyone who's supporting zkSync. The response from the ecosystem has been amazing. So you can go on ecosystem.zkSync.io and you'll see the full list of projects that registered to be listed there. It's usually accompanied by a blog post or a tweet storm on why they want to deploy on zkSync, what did they try, what worked, what didn't. And so from anybody who's interested, they can probably tell their experience much better than we could. So we thought that was a great way to engage with our ecosystem. Of those, I think we are in the 250 to 300 project region. It's actually quite a while. I don't check it, but I should have before this interview. But it's quite a large number already, given we just launched 10 days ago. Of those, 100 register and are whitelisted for the bridge, so they can bridge value into zkSync and are deploying. It's a little bit more than 100. So we did a lot of work, and we were a little bit lucky because we had zkSync V1, now zkSync Lite, available to engage with the broad infrastructure. But there is 24 wallet, there is a bunch of RPC node operators, there is data analytics, there is all the major infrastructure on ramps of ramps that you would expect both as a user as well as a developer that is already available on zkSync. They're not really project, they're usually unsung hero. I want to mention them first because without them, we can't really use anything. So having, the best project in the world without a wallet that is working well is really not very useful. Then we are very excited about the OG project. So this again, I think is the first where so many OG projects committed to deploy or said that they wanted to deploy on a new nascent chain. So we have Uniswap, we have Aave, we have Sushi, Curve, we have Balancer, we have MakerDAO. So if you take the list of the 5 projects, you essentially go through that list and pretty much all of them are deploying immediately or quickly thereafter. And that's extremely cool. We are very happy to see that coming. I'm also equally happy for the long tail. So there's a lot, and we mentioned some before. I mean, what kind of stuff is enabled by zkRollup? A lot of this stuff that is enabled is also coming. They are native to Rollup or often native to zkSync directly. So you have order books project, you have spread trading, you have options. So you have a huge amount of variety there. There is identity project, as you may have seen. RNS did their identity pilot for the Republic of Palau. I think Vitalik has also an ID there on zkSync and on testnet. And now, of course, they're moving onto mainnet as well. There is a privacy partnership we are doing with Espresso, Sismo, with quite a few large players that are doing cool stuff. We're very excited to see what comes there. There is things we are doing with zero knowledge, applied to KYC and in general, gating, attestation, accreditation. So all of these projects, I think, are very, very cool. And they are not yet a huge, say, sub-industry within crypto, because they were blocked before by a technology that wasn't supporting them. But I totally believe that if I could go through passport control by signing a private transaction or by signing a transaction, or if I could open a bank account in the traditional world by signing a transaction, I would love to do that, and that would be wonderful adoption. On the NFT side, very excited. There's lots of marketplaces that are coming. Some of the very big ones like Mint Square, X2Y2, I think is now called Tofu, and there's quite a few others. There's quite a few collections that are coming. We are also talking with the big marketplaces. Some of them indicated that they may be coming in a quarter or so. So that's also very nice to see. And then on gaming, there's a lot of games that are coming online. There's some native games like Tavera, which are very cool, and they even integrated zkSync v1, so they are really interested to work in this ecosystem. And then there's many others that are looking from big to small. Some of also those who committed to other chains. We are in very advanced conversation. I can't say exactly who they are because they may still change their mind, but hopefully they'll decide that we eventually deploy. And then I'm very excited about the enterprises. So wait and see. There's going to be a lot of companies that are starting to take a similar stance as Coinbase. So Coinbase is very crypto native. It's an exchange. They know what crypto is. And so it kind of makes sense that they are the first to think about the protocol team to move their infrastructure on chain. But stay tuned because there's others, and they are the big brand and the big names that we know from traditional finance, but also traditional gaming, from supply chain, from trade finance, that are all taking a very serious look to the chain because, with zkRollup, essentially, we enable their ability to actually deploy.
Marco, we just have a few more rapid fire questions for you. We probably should wrap up here soon. So why don't we start with, what do you think is the least understood aspect of layer 2 scaling for Ethereum?
I think, can I mention more than one? Because I think there's a couple that are probably very misunderstood. So one is limitless scaling, hyperscaling. So this we think it's extremely important. It's not obvious to most. And people think that rollups will solve the problem of scaling, while not. Rollups are kicking the can. 4844 is kicking the can. If we want the world of value to move on chain, we need millions of transactions per second, and rollups plus danksharding alone cannot enable it. What you need is volition and hyperchains, or whatever the other people will do in a similar fashion. But in general, you need fractal scaling, and you need Validium and volition in order to do that. And recursive zero-knowledge proof seems to be the only technology that enable limitless scaling and hyperscaling. So that's one thing that I don't think is well understood. The second is the discussion about account abstraction. People think about account abstraction as a nice thing to have. I think account abstraction is a necessary condition for success, unless we want the crypto community to stay within its group. So in our bubble, in our echo chamber, of course, we all dealt with our private keys. We may have ledgers. We may have Gnosis safes. We have figured that out. But we are 0.001001% of the human population. If we wanted the remaining 99.999 to come, we need account abstraction. I don't think there is any other possible ways. And this in turn is another small misunderstanding. We have EVM equivalence. So people think EVM equivalence is strictly better. But actually, EVM equivalence has two sides of the coin. So yes, you get this high degree of compatibility, which is great. Typically comes with a very big performance drop, which is not great. But on top of that, the high degree of compatibility or the total alignment with Ethereum also means that you're aligning yourself with Ethereum roadmap, which is slowish and a little bit unpredictable for good reason, because Ethereum deals with hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, while a rollup, especially a new rollup, should be more nimble and agile and implement things now that is small so that you can test them by the time is big, is going to have new feature. But two, there is a future in which, especially a future where rollups are successful, where Ethereum stops completely implementing anything that is user-facing. Because that's what Vitalik said, right? So if Ethereum becomes a chain whose clients, whose users are rollups themselves, and the real users are behind the rollups, speak to rollup, then why Ethereum should ever implement account abstraction, for example? And so if you are totally equivalent, you will have a problem. You will have to pivot. An analogy here is imagine Revolut, which is very cool as an app. It's all very nice. What if they used the Bank of International Settlement system? That would not have been cool. And that's a little bit what the EVM equivalence is really forcing some projects to do. So I think this is not completely understood. And the fourth is that security comes with time and effort, and is something that yes, you have a security audit, it's great, but it's an incremental process. You know, you have a security audit, you may want to have two, you may want to have bug bounty, and bug bounty works with time. You know, if you have a bug bounty tomorrow, you are not safe. Because it's not that all the hackers will check you and try to probe you tomorrow, and if they fail, then okay, you win. If you have bug bounty, you need to leave some time in order for this to take hold and for the security to propagate and to expand. That's why we have been in testnet from February last year to now. So essentially, we stayed a year in testnet. That's why we launched 4 months ago in mainnet, but we kept it closed to go through this security checks and issues. So there's a very big misunderstanding about how you do securities in mission critical systems like blockchains. Time, it's really important. And once you launch, you really need to just wait and let people kill you. And if they fail, then you're safe. And it's going to be a kind of exponentially smaller probability of failure, but never zero, right? So you always have to pay attention.
Marco, what advice would you give yourself if you were just getting started in crypto today?
Well, to be a little bit less.
Get on zkSync era.
Yes, get on zkSync era.
Get on zkSync. That's it. Nothing else. Just get on zkSync. Anything else you would offer up?
To maybe be at least less of a degen as I would have been. I mean, I think having kept more Ether rather than having done like 2,000 transactions. So just the amount of Ether spent in fees is probably something I would have benefited from. And then the direct losses of having degenerated a bunch of things is probably also not exposed and not very smart, but a lot of fun.
This is a benefit that we're all looking forward to with zkSync era. It's part of the reason I think CowSwap became so popular. Not having to waste ETH on transactions and being able to pay in any sort of native token, it really does save you from a lot of depression, looking back and realizing that you spent however much ETH on a transaction when Ether was at a much lower price, and realizing again over time like what that amount was against something like US dollars or any other sort of fiat. Okay, so one last question for you. I actually just noticed this before the interview. The zkSync Twitter cover photo says scaling Ethereum security and values. I'm curious, what do you mean by this? Why do you actually reference values, especially given the dumpster fire that was 2022 with, centralized players like FTX that got blown up?
Yes, exactly because of that. So, I mean, the reason why I joined zkSync is because I read the handbook, which, by the way, I encourage anybody who's interested in knowing us more to go and read. It's public. It's on the Meta Labs website rather than the zkSync website. And it's really cool to see the initial, the mission statement. So we feel we are a mission-driven company. The mission is the first thing we try to do. And I like the fact that Alex chose the word accelerate the adoption of crypto. The word accelerate means that the adoption is inevitable. The only thing we can do is to just make it go faster, which I think is a pretty cool approach to things. And we totally share in this. So if we all have the right ethos, so if we all try to achieve something that is bigger than the sum of the part, and we all contribute to that something, which is how zkSync wants to play in the space, then we will eventually both benefit as a group, both people that contributed, but also both people that didn't contribute will benefit, but also the people that contributed. So even if you make your code open source, even if you help other people to fork you, even if you do security disclosure to people that forked you, which is something we had to do with zkSync V1 a lot, you still benefit at the end of the day. It's partially in your interest because you are part of this broader ecosystem, and it's partially in the broader, global interest, because you further the main thing that I think is brought with crypto, which is freedom. So if I have to think why crypto, for me, the main reason is that it allows mutually distrusting parties to collaborate without relying on the old technology, which is intermediaries or authority. And that's pretty cool. Now, that means freedom that comes with it. And with freedom, we all are, our life is better for everyone. So we really would like to further that mission as much as we can.
Marco, this was so much fun. I kind of wish that I could have you just pop out at my house when my kids ask me really hard questions about why is the sky blue? And then you could be like, well, children, sit down. Let me tell you all about the atmosphere in the sky and why it is blue. You are so articulate at talking through some of the most like complicated topics. And so, yeah, just really appreciate you helping to dumb this all down for us. I'm really excited for listeners to get like a deep dive on some really important topics to understand as they start to use zkSync Era. Just a few quick notes for listeners. You're going to want to go to zkSync.io. That's the website to learn more about zkSync and the zkSync Era. You can go to matter-labs.io if you want to learn about the team that's been developing this for many years. And then, of course, you'll want to follow zkSync on Twitter. Marco, anything else that you'd like to share or any recommendation for folks wanting to follow you or learn more about your work or get in touch with you?
So yeah, I think you mentioned the three critical places, Twitter and our two websites. There's also a Telegram channel that is linked from the website. There's a Discord channel that is linked from there. We are engaging in all of this platform, everyone. We are engaging in person, so we are a very distributed team, so feel free to reach out and check where we are. We actually want to grab a beer with you if we are in a similar region. We are now starting to go to more events. We have been a little bit in stealth up to last year, trying to be conservative and saving the capital for the rainy days. Now that we are launching, we start to engage much more also in person. So we'll be in Denver, we'll be in a bunch of other conferences this year. But also we participate as individuals to many other conferences, even those that we don't sponsor. And so always try to reach out and see. Usually there is some of us at the conference that you're going and we love to meet. And then feel free to reach out to hello@matterlabs.dev where we can just reply to any question you have. If you are a project, send us emails. We would like to grab some time with you and jump on a video call and see where we can help.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented builder like Marco, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please subscribe at our link tree at edge_pod.